Welcome to our program, Neighbor to Neighbor. I'm Robin Stern. I am the guest host today, sitting in for Lynn Corum. And our guest for today is Patty O'Donnell. Patty is the State House Representative for the District of Guilford and Vernon in Windham County.
Yes.
And we're delighted to see you again. This is part 2 of our interview with Patty. And we promised when we last spoke that we were going to use some time to specifically talk about Vermont Yankee, because that's clearly a big issue. That's one, facing the legislature, facing the residents of Vernon and Windham County, and in fact the state of Vermont. You probably are best able and perched to be able to tell us how did we get here, where are we, and where are we going?
Okay, how did we get here? If you mean by here, the legislature making the decision on Vermont Yankee, when Entergy wanted to put the dry cask storage in, that was one of the deals that Entergy made with the legislature. Now, I think if they had a crystal ball, they probably never would have made that decision. At the time, they felt or assumed that the legislature would make a decision on facts and not on emotion. And I'm not real sure that that's what's happening at this point. I don't think it's ever been a secret that I support Vermont Yankee. I come from that community. I understand what's going on at Vermont Yankee. I've been able to weed through the negative comments that are made about Vermont Yankee, the false things that are said, and really the truth of Vermont Yankee. I live in a community that has a tremendous amount of people that work at the plant. I know those folks, and I know some of them. I know their spouses, I know their children, and I know that not a single one of them would work at that plant if there was anything to be afraid of. And that's one of the luxuries I think Vernon has over the rest of the state. We get to know those people. I understand how those people feel and care about their community. And there's not a single one of them that would hesitate pressing a button and shutting that system off if there was anything to be afraid of. They're not going to jeopardize the health and safety of their children across the street in the elementary school. There are 650 hardworking, high-quality, wonderful people that work at that plant, and what's happened to them through last legislative session, I think, has been disgusting, if nothing else. And you know, I want to make it clear, it's not Entergy that runs that plant. It's the folks at Vermont Yankee. And I think, in some ways, a certain few political careers were more important than the 650 jobs at Vermont Yankee. Now, let me explain the tritium. The tritium leak did happen. There's no mistake about that. Our own Department of Health said right through the whole thing that there was never a threat to health and safety for anybody in Vermont. There was never tritium in the drinking water, even at the plant that sits right above where the leak was. There was no tritium in the drinking water. And there certainly wasn't tritium going into the Connecticut River. The amount of tritium that was in the ground was the same amount of tritium that's in an exit sign.
You mean the exit sign at a restaurant, or
Yes.
when we're at the theater?
When you
the
go
red
out a door,
exit
you
signs.
see those. That's the same amount of tritium. And when you're talking the minute amount of measuring they were able to do, it's tiny, tiny, tiny bits of tritium. Now, should it have happened? No. But tritium isn't life-threatening. It's not dangerous to human safety.
Then how, and this I think is an important question, how do any of our viewers understand what the facts are? Who does one believe, and how do you know whom to believe? Because when I pick up the newspaper or I listen to a political debate or the radio, I will hear you say that of course safety is paramount, but it's safe. But I'll hear an opposing candidate talk about the terrible dangers of Yankee. And how does someone who's not in your seat find out what the truth is?
Well, you know, it's funny you asked that question, Robin, because you went right into what I was going to say next. I think that the biggest disservice we've done to Vermont is get the legislature involved in the Vermont Yankee debate to begin with. We have an NRC and we have a public service board. Now, the public service board was put into law in the early 70s by none other than the legislature, because the legislature understood that they did not have the background and the ability to understand these issues. There's not a single person in the legislature that's a nuclear engineer or a nuclear physicist or understands nuclear power.
But isn't that the case in anything that the legislature addresses?
No.
That they're not really experts in that particular field, but they're still tasked with what's best for the state of Vermont. Is this different?
Not really, not to this extent. You know, there are people, we take a lot of testimony in the legislature. If we're dealing with Medicaid, we'll have people come in and take testimony about Medicaid. Different, whether it be detailing for pharmaceutical drugs, we've taken testimony on all of that. The difference between the Public Service Board and the legislature is the Public Service Board is a quasi-judicial board. Now, you'd understand what that means. Most people watching probably don't. They take their testimony under oath, and they take their testimony from all interveners. So people from all sides of the spectrum, whether it's an anti-nuke group or a pro-nuke group, they take their testimony from Vermont Yankee, from Entergy. So they get a well-rounded group of people giving testimony.
And because they're under oath, the presumption is they're telling the truth.
Or they're under, they've committed perjury. In the legislature, people come in and testify, and it is not a quasi-judicial board. They can say anything they want, and most times, no matter what they say, we don't even check into it. I found out about tritium by going online, by Googling tritium and finding out what it was and what it meant. And there are 27 other plants in the country that have tritium leaks. We're not hearing a single thing about any of those plants. Why? Because a lot of what's happening here is just purely politics. It's philosophical beliefs getting in the way of finding the facts. The NRC oversees the safety of Vermont Yankee. You know, look at the nuclear industry compared to any other industry in this country. It is the safest industry we have. Europe uses nuclear power very, very safe all the time. It is a good, high quality, cheap, safe source of energy. It's a lot safer than the oil rigs where people died, the gas plant that they were building down in Connecticut. How many people died a few months ago? No one's ever died in a nuclear accident.